It's always nice when someone else does the book promo part and I can just pretend to be pure and not actually selling it. Thank you so much to Rice and Artists in Bloomsbury for inviting me to do this. It's just such an honour always to be invited to judge other people's work. And in some ways it's a great thing because I get to just pick the stories that I love personally. But in some ways also it's very difficult because I am very often on the other side of that all the time. And so I know how it feels to have sent off your story with so much hope attached to it. And I think it's a very brave thing. So I wanted to applaud all those 1,700 people who did that and who took that step of sending their words out into the world, which is not a step any of us writers take lightly, I think. And before I announce the top 3 that I picked, I also wanted to say, I don't know how many of the 20 shortlisted writers have made it tonight. And this is going to sound a little cheesy, but really, you guys are all winners because you rose to the top 20 out of 1,700. I'm going to say that several times. 1,700. I thought it was 1,400, and I'd worked out that was a 70-to-1 shot. But now my stats have got a bit confused. But it's even, the odds are even bigger. And so that is the really, really impressive thing, and you should all congratulate yourself because that's really fantastic. It meant that all of your stories grabbed the reader and didn't let the reader go, which is fantastic. And now on to the announcement of the top 3. So first I'll announce the 2 runners-up and then the winner. I'll just say really a few brief remarks about each of them because the delightful thing is that you're going to hear these stories, which is really wonderful. So it's best that I don't say too much about them at all. So, there are 2 runners-up, both on equal footing, and the first runner-up I chose because this story made me laugh out loud, and that is a very, very rare thing. I am very hard to please, let alone be made laugh, and it was fantastic, but it wasn't just a kind of extended joke. The humour was an essential part of this story, and the voice of the story, the voice of the main character is so strong. And it's also a story that has a really serious point to make about family dynamics. And it also gives a really nice twist to the genre that it fits into. And I will say no more about it, just to say that our first runner-up is Lagley by Neil Mason. Unfortunately, Neil Mason can't be with us tonight. So I will move on to our second runner-up. And this is a story that it took quite a familiar premise of a story and it did something really different with it. It really looked at this what could have been quite a traditional plot line in a totally new way, and I found that all the 3 stories I picked would not leave my head, and this was definitely one of them that kept going round and round in my head, and I don't want to say anything else about it because you're going to hear it tonight, and it's beautifully written. And so the second runner-up is Miss Copley's Freedom by Tristram Lewis. Tristan is with us tonight, so I can present you with your prize if you'd like to come up, and I've just left the prize down there. Hang on. Your prize, as well as the glory and the honour. No, come up, come up. It's these 3 beautiful Bloomsbury books, and all of our congratulations. Congratulations. And now the winning story. This is a story that, it takes risks, this story. And that's something that I really applaud that any writer does this. Because when you take risks, one of the main risks is that your reader will stop reading instantly. And the first risk this winning story takes is that it looks different on the page. And I like that. But then there's always a part of me thinking, well, does that serve the story or is it just a gimmick? But this interesting structure really served this story. And the second risk this story takes is that it treads that really fine line between preserving mystery and confusing the reader. And it's very hard to get the right line between those two, because if you step over onto the confusing side, your reader could just leave at any point and stop reading. And this story really does it perfectly. And it's also beautifully written, and it has quite magical elements to it. And I won't say anything more about it, but I'll just tell you that the winner of this year's Writers and Artists Yearbook Short Story Competition is For the Discerning Traveler by Grace Tsai. Unfortunately, Grace cannot be with us, but she has an excellent excuse because she lives in Taiwan. So this event is being videoed, so we can all wave to Grace and say huge congratulations, and you will be getting your prize forthwith, and we will be hearing your wonderful story. So once again, congratulations to all the 20 shortlisted writers and the 2 runners-up and the winner. And it was a real honour to read all these stories which took the theme of freedom and all did such completely different things with it. So congratulations to everybody. Before we move on to the professional actors reading the stories, I've been invited very kindly to read 2 of my very short stories. So I thought I would read you one from my collection and one very new one that I hope might speak to the writers in the audience. This story is called At Camden Town He Said He Loved Me. We shared an armrest on the Northern Line, our elbows sidling into one another. He said he was a poet. He said he loved me even before we got to Camden Town. By Chalk Farm he offered eternal devotion. Don't rush me, I said. I'll give you my answer at Charing Cross. He waited, scratched his nose. I looked him up and down through tunnels and at station stops, and wondered if he'd just be one more heart-shaped bruise on my already mottled skin. I got out early, slid through the doors at King's Cross just before they shut and stood there, watching him paw at the window with his poet's fingers, confusion in his eyes. I thought he mouthed, I love you, but it could have been, you're just another emotional virgin. I rode up the escalator, wondering how it might have been, but by the time I'd crossed over to the Victoria line, I was already scanning the platform, hoping that here I'd find my true love. And the other very, very short story is a new one that I wrote for an episode of The Verb on Radio 3. They asked me to write a very short story on the subject of writing and editing. So some of you might find this familiar. It's called My New Story. And so I went up the tower to get a better view of my new story down below. But I was too high up, I couldn't see. My story was blurred and indistinct. A captain lent me his telescope. When I was finished, he took it back and had a look himself. Do you really think it should start there? He murmured, one eye still fixed to the scope. I glared at him, then ran back down all the twisty steps to scoop up my story. I took my new story for a walk along the high street. We passed a nurse who stopped and stared. A bit flabby in the middle, don't you think? She said, indicating towards my story. But before I could answer, she rushed off to help someone, somewhere. My new story and I went swimming. We stayed in the shallow end and splashed around. A small child paddled past, looked greedily at my story and snatched a character. Hey, I said, give that back, it doesn't belong to you. Mine, mine, screamed the child, squeezing the character between her chubby fingers. I tried to prise them apart, but parents had to be involved. I fought with one hand, keeping my story afloat with the other. In the changing room, I towel-dried my story. It was bent, slant, askew, but still beautiful. Thank you.